Okay, is everybody ready? We'll start with chapter 5, verse 1. You ready, Rafael? Okay, Shlomo haya Moshe b'chol ha'mamlachos min ha'nohar eretz plishtim ad gevul Mitzrayim. Shlomo, not Solomon, King Shlomo, was the ruler over all of the little kingdoms from the river until the lands of the Pelishtim. That means from the Jordan at least to the lands of the Pelishtim, which was by Gaza. B'yad gevul Mitzrayim, and down towards the boundary of with Egypt. They extended gift offerings to Shlomo, and they served Shlomo. How they served him? With either tribute or sometimes with labor. All the days of his life. And Shlomo had such an extensive royal table that the amount of bread that was consumed in one day was 30 kor solis, 30 kor of flour, fine flour. V'shishim kor kemach, and 60 kor of unrefined flour. We might call that chita mleya. How much was this? Huge amount. Asara bakar briim, 10 cattle that were healthy, fatted. Ve'esrim bakar re'i, and 20 cows, basically, that pastured in the fields. So there were 20, Asara, 10 were fatted and 20 were naturally grown, let's call it. Umei atzon, and 100 sheep. V'vad me'ayil, not counting the rams, v'tzvi, and nor the deer, v'yachmor, or the fallow deer, u'bar burim, and the fatted fowl, avusim, that were, grown in captivity and fatted up. Kihu rodeh al b'chol ever hanor, for he had sovereignty and supremacy over all of the east bank of the river. Mitiftach v'ad Azah, from Tiftach all the way to Azah, B'chol Malchi Ever Hanor, and also all of the kingdoms on the west side of the river, down towards Azah. V'shalom ha'yula mikol avadav misaviv, avarav, and there was peace to Shlomo from all of the surrounding peoples from all sides. Vayeshev Yehuda v'Yisrael levetach, and Yehuda and Israel dwelled in security. Ish tachas kafno, each person under his vineyard, v'ish tachas teinaso, and every person under his fig trees. Midon ba'ad Beersheva, from Dun in the north to Beersheva in the south. Kol yemei Shlomo, all the days of Shlomo. So that's a general statement of the wealth of Shlomo, the expanding influence of Shlomo, the supremacy that he had, not by means of war, but by means of peace, over all the surrounding nations. Vayila Shlomo 40,000 uros susim, v'merkavo. And Solomon and Shlomo had 40,000 troughs, which generally meant for food and for water, for his horses, for his chariots. U'shnei masar elef proshim, and 12,000 riders. So there were approximately 3 riders for every horse. Why would he need so many horses? If he only had 12,000 riders, could have had, let's say, 24,000 horses. What did he do? 2 horses for every rider. Why did he need so many horses for these riders? So let's keep that question in check for a moment or two. And this is a flashback to where we learned that there were 12 regions over 12 regional areas of the land of Israel, which Shlomo split the nation into 8 that were fashioned randomly, and 4 not randomly, but certainly not along tribal lines, and 4 that were fashioned along tribal lines, and we explained that last week. And all of these regions supplied the king the royal table of the king, each one for a specific month, and nothing was lacking, nothing was missing. V'hasa'orim, and the barley, v'hatevin lasusin, and the straw for the horses, v'larechesh, and to the chariots, v'yaviu el hamakom asher yeshamish kimishpata. They were brought not to one area from which then Shlomo distributed it, but they were all brought to the stations where these horses were stationed, where they were stabled. What is this telling us? That Shlomo used these horses, or he placed these horses in various locations throughout his rule, throughout his kingdom. Why would he do that?
Quick response.
He had a rapid response team. This was all defensive. Shlomo decided to place his horses throughout the nation. That's why he needed so many horses, because he stationed them all about the land, along the borders, maybe a little bit interior, so that they wouldn't be immediately attacked, but they would be able to respond to attacks along the entire boundary and border of Israel. And that was the purpose of these horses. Strategic defensive positions they held in order to defend the country. So whereas Shlomo was not involved in warfare, he had, what did he say? Peace through strength. He built up his security forces to such an extent that they were strategically located, and that deterred any attack. And he had a vast amount of horses and cavalry and soldiers at the ready, strategically located, and that ensured peace. Yes?
It was said that he had too many horses.
We'll get to that. We're starting out with his good intentions. We're starting out with appropriate uses for the horses. We will get to it as time wears on. We will see what happens to King Shlomo. Okay, so at least initially, we've discovered the reason for all these horses. Vayitein Elokim Chochma leShlomo. And God blessed and gave Shlomo wisdom, utvuna, and understanding haremio, to a very profound degree. Rochav leiv kachol asher al sfas hayom, and an expansive heart, like the sea, like the sand that was on the banks of the Mediterranean Sea. Vaterav chochma Shlomo mechochmas kol b'nei keter. And the wisdom of Solomon was greater than the wisdom of the wise men of the East. Where do we encounter the wise men of the East? In the story of the birth of Christianity, unfortunately. But here we are talking about the wisdom of Shlomo was greater than the wisdom of the wise men of the East. Umikol chachmas Mitzrayim. And it was superior to the wisdom and knowledge of the Egyptians, who were, I guess you would say, the aristocracy, the repository for wisdom and knowledge and science, at least of their time, was Egypt. And Shlomo's wisdom exceeded the wisdom of the Egyptians. Vayachkam mikol ha'odam. And he was wiser than all of man. Me'etan ha'ezrachi, from Etan ha'ezrachi, came from the east. Ve'Haman, and a gentleman called Haman. Ve'Chalkol, and someone named Chalkol. Ve'Dardar, B'nei Machal, the sons of Machal. Rashi tells us, who are these people? Etan, Haman, Chalkol, and Dardar. Achim ayu, they were brothers. B'nei Zerach ben Yehuda, they were the sons of Zerach. Zerach was the son of Yehuda. Shenemar u'b'nei Zerach, Zimri, Etan, etc., etc.
Rabbi, how do we measure the wisdom? By wealth?
No, we measure the wisdom by knowledge. Rashi brings another explanation from the MIDRASH RECHAVIA. Mikol ha'odam, greater than Adam Harisha. Eitan Hoezrachi, the powerful one from the east, Ze Avrum Avinu. This was Avrum Avinu, smarter than Avrum Avinu, who was the great philosopher, who spent his life searching for truth and determined by dint of his philosophical inquisition the existence of God. Haman, Ze Moshe. That's Moshe Rabbeinu. He was wiser in the wisdoms of the world than even Moshe Rabbeinu, who, in whose zuchus, in whose merit the mon fell on the Klal Yisrael, and therefore he's called Haman. Bechalkal, Ze Yosef. Why? Because Yosef was mechalkel, the people, actually all of the Egyptian people, but also his own family, during the time of the hunger. Vidardar said, it's a play on the word dor, dea, the generation of knowledge. Zedor Hamidbar, that's the door of the desert that witnessed the giving of the Torah at Har Sinai. Machol, why is it called B'nai Machol? Shenimcha lahem al ma'isa ha'egel, for that generation was forgiven for the sin of the Egel. So anyway, the Midrash tries to find these four people amongst the greatest people that ever lived in the Jewish nation. But the simple pshat is that he was smarter than the wise men of Egypt, from the wise men of the East, and from the very famous wise people that lived in his own time. Vayhi shemo b'chol hagoyim sabiv, and his name rose and became great amongst all the nations that surrounded him. Vayedaber shloshes alafim mashal, and he spoke 3,000 allegories. Vahi shiro chamisha ve'elef, and he composed 1,005 songs of praise to Hashem. Vayedaber al ha'etzim, and he spoke on trees. In ha'eres, from the cedar asher b'Lebanon, which is from Lebanon, the cedars of Lebanon. V'ad ha'ezov asher yotzei bakir, from the little burst of, you would say, a little bush, maybe, I don't even know what you would call it, twigs or whatever that sprout from a wall. From the mightiest tree down to the lowliest blade of grass. Vayedaber al ha'behema, and he could speak about animals, v'al ha'of, and on birds, v'al ha'remes, and on creepy crawlers, v'al ha'dogim, and on fish. What does this mean? Yes, sir.
So I had a question before your question.
Okay.
Why does the Navi speak of all the, give a list of his contacts, of his wisdom, of his wealth, but he doesn't speak of the wisdom itself? So, okay, he spoke about the trees. Well, what did he speak about the trees?
Okay. What does that mean? That's what I asked. What does it mean? You're saying, what was the content of the wisdom?
Yes.
Well,
I'm not saying what was the content. I'm saying, why does the Navi not speak of the content?
right.
That's my question.
Okay. Why does the Navi not speak of the content? Well, first of all, the Navi is speaking to the Jewish people, and if this is such brilliance, it would go right over most of our heads. That could be one reason. Second of all, the Mefarshim say, where are these 1,005 songs? Where are these 3,000 mashalim?
Yeah.
They were written down and lost in the course of Jewish history. That's how the Mefarshim understand this. There was a record of at least part of his wisdom, but it was lost to posterity because of disruptions in our possession of the land, sacking of the palace of the king. There are some, who say that the Greeks got some of the wisdom of Shlomo, and that's why the Greeks started their quest and their drive for wisdom based on the writings of Shlomo HaMelech, which were plundered and taken. Is that true? I don't know. And I think the pshat is when it says that he spoke to the trees. Most people, I would say simple, I don't want to say simpletons, but simple pshat is that he could speak to animals and flowers and trees, and I don't think that's true. But who am I to say? I think it means that he was a botanist, and that he was a geologist, and he was a what is it for a biologist? He could speak about. Sorry, you don't have to. I get rid of this. Okay, fine. He could speak about. He can speak about all of these things because he was a pursuer of wisdom. He knew the science of his day for sure, and he exceeded that science. He knew medicine. He knew how to speak about rock formations. He knew how to speak about the trees and what made them grow and how they would prosper and what would be the proper soil for them and what would be the proper fertilizer. All these things he knew. And all the way down to the minutest detail, because he was a practitioner of the pursuit of wisdom. He was a very brilliant person, but he didn't sit back on his laurels and it didn't just fly into his head. It was a pursuit of knowledge and a pursuit of wisdom that led him to his greatness. And there was nothing beyond his ken. There was nothing beyond his interest. He pursued all of these things so that he could amass a tremendous wealth of knowledge. And they came from all the world, from all the reach, from all the surrounding areas, to hear the wisdom of Shlomo, to see, to discuss with him, maybe the agricultural pursuits of their own particular land, maybe their geological issues. Whatever it is, they all came to discuss that with Shlomo and to hear the words of wisdom that he would impart that might have relevance to them. From all of the kings of the land, there were delegations arriving in Yerushalayim almost, let's say, on a constant basis, where they heard about the great wisdom of Shlomo and that he could discuss pertinent issues with them from a broad and wide spectrum of knowledge. Vayishlach Hiram melech Tzor, and Hiram, the king of Tzor, not to be confused with Hiram Walker, but this is Hiram, the king of Tzor. He sent his servants to Shlomo, Ki Shama, because he heard Ki Oso Mashru Melech Tachas Avihu, for they had anointed Shlomo, they being the Jewish people, had anointed Shlomo to be king in the place of his father. Ki Ohev Hoya Hiram LeDavid Kol Hayamim. Hiram, the king of Tzor, was a very close friend. He loved David HaMelech all the days of David's life, and he was younger than David, and he survived David, and he attached himself to Solomon, Shlomo, the son of David. Okay. Now in Shmuel Beis, Samuel 2, Parikh, chapter 5, Pasuk Yud Aleph, it says there, Vayishlach Hiram melech Tzor Malachim el David, and Hiram, the king of Tzor, this very same Hiram, sent to David HaMelech messengers, Va'atzei arozim, and planks of cedar wood, V'chorshei eitz, and wood carvers, V'chorshei eved, and stone carvers, V'chorshei kir, ones who knew how to fashion walls. Vayivnu bayis LeDavid, and they built a palace for David. The next words in the Tanakh are Vayeda David, and then David knew, Ki hechino Hashem lemelech al Yisrael, that God had designated him and prepared him and ensconced him to being the king of Israel. V'chinose mamlach malchuso ba'avur amo Yisrael, and that his kingship was elevated because of his people Israel. This is a very strange passage. Out of the blue, out of the clear, no previous contact, suddenly Hiram, the king of Tzor, sends wood, stone hewers, wood carvers to David HaMelech with instructions to build for him a palace. Then David knows this is a signal or a sign to David that God has truly designated him as the king of Israel. So, First of all, we need to understand that pasuk. Second of all, we will see shortly that Hiram supplies material artisans to Shlomo to help and to participate in the construction of the Beis HaMikdash. Question is, why does Hiram, this Gentile, have such a zechus, have such a merit to be a, let's call him a junior partner in the construction of the Temple of Israel, the great house of God? Who is he? Who is this Hiram? What is his merit? Well, the first thing that Mefarshim will point out to us shortly is that Hiram was someone who kept the 7 Noahide laws. Okay. So then we can right away understand that Hiram is not an idolator. Even though he comes from an idolatrous populace, from the Chittim or from Zor, he was personally not an idolater. Okay, so he wasn't an idolater. Does that make him a partner in the construction of the Beis HaMikdash? Does that make him a partner in the building of, not even a partner, a key player in the building of David's palace? What is this great zechus that Hiram has, and on what basis did he merit to have such a lofty position in Kings and in Samuel? We okay there, Raphael? You got it down? So, let's just reflect back on a major difference that is developing here between the monarchy of Shaul HaMelech and the monarchy of David HaMelech, and ultimately the monarchy of Shlomo HaMelech. Where did Shaul live after he was anointed to be king of Israel? Well, I think he lived, you know where Nagara is in Givat Shaul? Joking. But he lived in Givat Shaul. He lived in Givat Shaul. That means he went back to his local village, which was on the outskirts of Yerushalayim at the time. At that time, Yerushalayim was occupied by the Jebusites. It was not even under Jewish sovereignty yet, which did not happen until later on during the reign of King David. So Shlomo goes back to his, let's call it, sleepy little village, and he lives there. In fact, as he plows ground there, he works his own land. He doesn't have any of the accoutrements of Malchus. Remember, Shaul is a nechpa el hakelim. He's a very, very modest person, and he lived very modestly. He had none of the trappings of royalty. He didn't build a palace for himself. He didn't have a standing staff to serve him. He worked his own land. He grew his own crops. He produced his own food. He was a simple king. He might be what you might call a shepherd king or a farmer king. Hiram sends to David. He says, make sure you don't follow in that example of Shaul. Make sure you begin to command respect. Make sure that you have a palace, that you don't go back to your little hovel or your little house, and you don't live in your village. You're going to live in your capital city that you newly liberated from the Jebusites. You're going to make that a capital. You're going to move out of Bethlehem from where you hail, and you're going to move to Jerusalem, to Yerushalayim, your capital city. And you're going to build a palace for yourself. You're going to have a central government. You're going to have a focal point for the people. There's going to be you're going to command respect. And that's what you need to do, because if you don't do that, you'll be making the same mistake as Shaul. And ultimately, while you might be a humble person, or maybe even equally, maybe far exceeding Shaul in humility, maybe less, maybe more, don't know. But if you pursue that type of humble lifestyle, you will never command the respect of the people. And remember, what does Shaul say when he makes a mistake? The people made me do it. He never could extract himself out from under that powerful influence of the people. He could never assert his leadership because he was always worried about what the people would say, because he was a humble, simple king. David had to learn right at the outset of his kingship not to emulate Shaul, but to set up a capital, set up a palace, set up a central point, a capital city, command respect, demand respect, and then you will be a king over all Israel. And that is the merit of Hiram. And because of that, he also merits to be a partner in the building of the Beis Hamikdash. For as we will learn when we learn about the construction of the Holy Temple in Yerushalayim, the palace of the king and the palace of God, the temple of Hashem, the Beis Hamikdash, are really one and the same project. But we will leave that to a discussion when we come to it at the time that the Beis Hamikdash is completed. That is who Hiram is, that is his merit, and now Hiram begins to establish a relationship with Shlomo, the son of his very dear friend David. David respected Hiram for pointing out that which we might consider obvious fact, but certainly was not, because Shaul was such a humble person, and therefore David had to alter his methodologies to accommodate the idea that was planted in his mind by Hiram. So, Vayishlach Hiram el Saborav el Shlomo, and he sends his servants to Shlomo. In other words, here it points out that Hiram reaches out to Shlomo, for he heard that Shlomo was anointed to be king in place of his father David. He always Hiram with David Kol Yomim. There was a love relationship, a great, deep, profound friendship between Hiram and David all of his days. Are you standing to ask a question? No? Okay, next pasuk. We're on pasuk Tez Zayin. We're in chapter 5, pasuk Tez Zayin. Vayishlach Shlomo el Hiram Lemor. And Shlomo responds to whatever it is that Hiram sent to him. Most likely, Hiram called him on the phone and gave him congratulations. I'm sure he didn't do it on Shabbos. He called him on the phone, and he must have, or he congratulated him for becoming the king of Israel. Vayishlach Shlomo el Hiram Lemor, and Shlomo responds, and he sends to Hiram as follows: Ata yadata, as David Avi. You knew my father David, ki lo yachal livnos bais l'shem Hashem elokav mipnei hamilchoma asher sevaruhu. That he was prevented from building a house to God, to the name of Hashem. By the way, notice it says l'shem Hashem, in the name of Hashem, elokav, his God. Because of war, Asher Svavahu, that surrounded him and engulfed him. Ad Teis Hashem Osam Tachas Kapas Raglav, until God ultimately delivered all of the enemies under the palm or under the foot of David, my father. V'atoy now, Heniach Hashem Elokai Li Misaviv, God has left me at peace from all that's around me. Ain Satan, I have no enemy. Ve'ein Pegara, nor is there anyone who is starting up with me, initiating untoward activity towards me. Ve'hineni omer livnos bais l'shem Hashem. And now I am a Elokoi, and I am stated to build a Beis Hamikdash, a house to the name of Hashem, my God. Kasher diber Hashem el David Avi, Lemor, as God spoke to my father David when David had the initiative to build a Beis Hamikdash, and Nasan HaNavi came to him and told him, no, you cannot do so because you are a warrior king, but your son, the one who emerges from your loins, he will build the temple to my name. So here says Shlomo, and I am now stated to build the house l'shem Hashem, kasher diber Hashem el David Avi, just like Hashem spoke to my father David. Lemor, saying to my father, Bincha, your son, asher atein tachtecha al kisecha, who I will place on the throne in your place, hu yivneh habayis l'shmi, he will build the house to my name. I want to point out something here that is going to reverberate throughout the discussion of the Navi about the construction of the temple to Hashem, the Beis Hamikdash. most people think, and maybe it's true, that God somehow his presence is mitzumtzam, constricted or restricted and confined in the and is to be found in the temple. Hashem compressed, so to speak, his honor and himself to some degree, if that's at all possible, and he is to be found in the Beis Hamikdash. The Shekhinah is shorer, the Shekhinah, which is a divine manifestation of God's presence, is to be found in the temple. That is a school of thought, probably engendered primarily by the concept, the Kabbalistic concept revealed by the Arizal of the concept of Tzimtzum. Now, if you're all Chabadniks, you have heard already of this concept of Tzimtzum. Since I told you right from the get-go that I am not a Kabbalist, but a rationalist, I will tell you that I frankly do not understand the concept of Tzimtzum. God is not composed of a body. Ein lo demusa guf, he has no form. He doesn't exist in the physical sense at all. He's above space and above time. Doesn't exist in time, nor does he exist in space. Therefore, I don't need a concept of Tzimtzum, because I never felt that God had to contract himself, because it's impossible. But I am guilty of blasphemy in the eyes of the people who believe in Tzimtzum. I just personally say I don't reject it, I just don't understand it. And that's how I function without being able to understand it. But I will show you from the text of the Tanakh, and here we start right at the beginning, that God is not to be found in the temple. His name is associated with the temple. This is the house of Hashem. God's name is associated with the temple, but over and over again the Navi is going to tell us that Hashem is not in the temple. So here is the first indication of that, where it says, God said to my father David, your son Solomon, Asher etein tachtecha al kisecha, who I, God, will place on the throne of Israel in your place, David, hu yivneh habayis, he will build the house lishmi, to my name. Not so that I will be there, I will not be there, but my name will be associated with this temple. Vata, and I want you to keep that thought in mind as we study, I would say, the next 2 or 3 prakim in the Tanakh, where we will learn about the construction of the Beis Hamikdash, and most primarily we will learn this fact. It will be driven home, I think, 10 times when we learn the prayer that Shlomo offers when he dedicates the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, so now having taught you a little shemitz, you know what a shemitz is? A little dab of blasphemy, we will go on. And now command, this is Shlomo's message to King Hiram. Now please, King Hiram, command your servants that they should hew or cut down for me cedars from Lebanon. And my servants will be with your servants. Meaning I will send tradesmen, people who are artisans, or I would call them apprentices, up to you, to Hiram in the north, because your people are experts in this field and my people are not. My people have learned to build from stone. What is to be found all over Israel? Stone, mountains, and the Torah tells us that the stones of Israel are like the copper and steel and iron of other nations. Because here there's such a prevalence of stone, the primary emphasis on building was from stone. But up where the cedars of Lebanon grew in abundance, your servants were artisans in building from wood. So I will send my servants to learn from your experts. And I will pay for this service of training my apprentices. Whatever amount of money you would like, let me just finish the pasuk. Ki ato yadato, because you know, you Hiram know, ki ein banu ish yodea lechros eitzim katzidonim. We do not have men who know how to hew trees, cut down trees, woodworking. We don't have woodworking experts like you, the Sidonese, have such experts available. Yes.
To this day, you can't build in Jerusalem unless you use Jerusalem stone.
Right.
Can't
Okay.
build
That's
anything.
cosmetic thing. You know, they wanted to. You know, they want a uniformity, and the Jerusalem stone is beautiful, and therefore they considered it aesthetic. You know, contribution to the beauty of Yerushalayim. Yes, sir.
The British introduced it.
British may have introduced it too, but I don't know if they had a law, because you see some places like in Rechavia where there's still some stucco used to build. I don't know, maybe the
That was
British
before
did.
that was before 1948.
Yes, I know that before the state, but it could be even before the British, maybe. I don't know. But the point is that maybe the British had that as a law, or maybe they just had it as a practice. But I don't know. Whatever it is, today it's certainly a law. Okay. Vayi kishmo Hiram es divrei Shlomo, and when Hiram heard these words from Shlomo, vayismach ma'od, and he was very overjoyed. He was very happy. Vayomer, and he said, Baruch Hashem Hayom, blessed today is God, Asher Nasan LeDavid ben Chacham, that he gave to David a wise son. Al ha'om ha'rav hazeh, over this multiple nation, this great nation. In other words, Hiram said, I applaud Shlomo's recognition that the artisans and the wood carvers and the wood choppers of Sidon are superior in their trade skills than the Jewish people, and that he is willing to learn from foreigners, from Goyim, how to do the work in a better fashion. And that made him happy to see the broad-mindedness of Shlomo and his own enlistment as a partner in helping to build the Beis HaMikdash, because Vayishlach Hiram el Shlomo Lemor, and then Hiram sends to Solomon saying to Shlomo, Shomati es asher shalachti elai. I understand the message, the request that you have sent to me. Ani eses kol chefzecha, I will fulfill all of your needs and desires. Ba'atzei arozim, uva'atzei baroshim. Not only will I send cedar wood, I'm also going to send atzei baroshim, which is cypress wood. Cedar wood being stronger, cypress wood being less strong, cypress wood being softer wood, cypress wood being more malleable, and we will see how Shlomo will incorporate these two different aspects of wood, two different types of wood, into the building of the Beis HaMikdash. Now comes a hint of wisdom of Hiram. How in the world is he going to get, let's call it, thousands of trees from the Lebanon down south into Israel? So he says, Avodah yoridu min ha'Lebanon yama. We will cut the trees down in Lebanon and bring them to the seacoast. And there, I'm going to tell you what he's going to do, and we'll read it in the sense a minute later. We'll strip them of their branches and leaves, so there'll be logs. We will lash the logs together, and we will float them down as rafts down the coast of the Mediterranean until we get to Israel. So that's Pasuk Chav Gimel. Avodah yoridu min ha'Lebanon yama. My servants will bring down to the coast, to the sea, from Lebanon to the coast of Lebanon, the sea by Lebanon. V'ani asimim dobros bayam, and I will lash them together as rafts in the sea. And we will send them downriver, downstream, whatever you want to call it, to the designated place that you will tell me. And there we will split them apart, back into logs. And there you will provide to carry these logs inland to Yerushalayim. And you, in turn, will give me food, produce from your land, to supply my household, meaning my country, my people, with bread. Not just bread, but, Jaffa oranges and apples from the Golan and blueberries from Giant, or whatever it is. you will supply me with various things that my people need. Vayhi Hiram nosen l'Shlomo arazim, and this was the treaty that was fashioned between Hiram and Solomon. And Hiram kept his end of the bargain. Vayhi Hiram nosen l'Shlomo atzei arazim, v'atzei broshim, kol chefzo. And Hiram supplied Solomon, Shlomo, with cedar wood, with cypress wood, kol chefzo, in whatever measure Shlomo needed. Shlomo nosan l'Hiram esrim elef kor chitim. And Shlomo sent to Hiram 20,000 kor. Chitim. Kor was usually a yield of a field of 60 amos by 60 amos. So 60 amos, 90 feet by 90 feet, whatever grew in that square, quarter, so to speak, of wheat, that's what he sent him. 20,000 such measures of wheat. Makolas lebeso, enough to supply his whole household, meaning obviously his nation and those who were working to cut down the trees. Vesin kor shemen, and 20 kor of oil. Kosis, what do you call it? What do they call that? First olive oil. What is it called? First press. Okay, first press of olive oil. Ko yitain Shlomo l'Hiram shana b'shana, and Shlomo would give this to Hiram every single year by year. That was the treaty. You send me as much cedar wood and as much cypress wood as I will ask for, and in addition you will train my men, and in addition you will help us learn how to become wood carvers and wood artisans, and in exchange for that I will give you this supply of food every single year. And God gave wisdom to Shlomo as he said he would. And there was peace between Hiram and Shlomo. And they both entered into a mutual covenant. I think this is a play on words here a little bit. Hashem nosan chochma l'Shlomo, and God gave wisdom l'Shlomo. Shlomo meaning peace, the wisdom of peace. And Shlomo took that wisdom of peace and made a peaceful covenant. Probably the first Abraham chords. He made a covenant of peace with Hiram. Vayala melech Shlomo mas mikol Yisrael. And then Shlomo taxed. Actually, it was a conscription, a draft. Not a tax of money, but a tax of people. He conscripted from the nation. He conscripted 30,000 Jewish people. And he sent them to the Lebanon. 10,000 at a month. So there were 30,000 men, people. Oh, men, of course, we're talking about men. 30,000 men, 10,000 month one. They came home. Sorry, let's read that pasuk Chav Ches. He sent 10,000 a month. Chalifos chodesh, and he exchanged them a month. Chodesh yiyu b'Lebanon. 1 month they would be in Lebanon. Ushnayim chadoshim bebeso, and 2 months he would be home. So he had 30,000 man force that he sent up to the Lebanon to be trained in how to hew trees, how to cut down trees properly, and how to lash them together and transport them, and how to carve them, and how to manage them, etc., etc. They became skilled workers after this training program. 10,000 at a time, so they went up for a month. Then they came home and another 10,000 took their place. And that second 10,000 came home and another 10,000 took their place for the third month. So there was a 3-month rotation of 10,000 each being trained up in the Lebanon. Those were the skilled workers. Okay, we take time. And Shlomo also had 70,000 porters, nosei sabal, those who could carry weight, carry the trees. Remember now the trees were floated down the coastline from Lebanon up north, down south to the Israeli port or whatever it was. Maybe didn't even need a port because they were coming down by raft, and they just took them ashore, probably in the straightest route that would lead to Yerushalayim, because they were going to carry them all the way to Jerusalem, and maybe not even carry them, but load them up on camels, donkeys, whatever, wagons, and they would transport them to Yerushalayim. He had 70,000 men working as porters, Ushmonim Elef Chotzei Bahar, and 80,000 workers hewing stone out of the mountains of Yehuda, out of the mountains of Israel. Now the Mefarshim say, and so it is indicated in Divrei Hayamim, in Chronicles, that these 150,000, 70,000 porters and 80,000 hewers of stone were not Jewish workers, but they were menial workers of nations that had been subjected and conquered by the Jewish people. And under the terms of their surrender to David HaMelech, they were required to do civil service, and this was their civil service. 150,000 of them, 70,000 carried and were porters of the wood, loading it up, transporting it to Jerusalem, and 80,000 were those who hewed stone out of the mountains. Besides the officers who were involved in supplying the king's monthly needs. Remember, supporting the household of Shlomo. Asher al Malacha, there were 3,000. There were 3,000 project managers, 3,300 project managers, Orodim Ba'am, who were in charge of the people, Ha'osim al-Malacha, who were fulfilling the work. Yes, sir.
Very interesting. This was a time of great prosperity and peace in Israel.
Correct.
We have...
Where it was just growing. It was just beginning.
We have at the present time also a time of great prosperity.
Right.
And some were debated, but I believe some would agree with me that it's a time of great peace because we really haven't had a major war for a long time. And just as in here, our workers, the people who are doing a lot of the agricultural work and other basic work are imported from abroad.
Right, or Arabs.
It's in a way, it's a proof of this reading that it's easy for us to understand this.
That we are returning to biblical times.
Yes, that's
the thrust of what you're saying.
And it also helps us with our Amunah. How could they have such prosperity? Well, we have it today.
Mm-hmm.
That we're importing a tremendous number of foreign workers.
Correct. Some say to a dangerous
Not only
point.
in the fields, but also to help our elderly people.
That's right. Oh, that's for sure. You know, I lived in the United States, as some of you may also have, and the care that's given to the elderly here is so far superior to the care that is given to elderly in the United States, even Jewish elderly in the United States. It's not to be believed. The Filipinos and the others, some Indians that are involved in taking care of the elderly here in this country are, unbelievable workers, dedicated, and they do it with compassion, and it's not just a job to them. They fashion a bond with the elderly that's just amazing. Anyway.
And that's one way that you do get to live to be old if you don't do all of this hard work all your life, because that shortens your life.
That could be. Some people will say it strengthens your life. But okay, I'm not going to get into that argument. It's a good point. Okay. All right. So anyway, we're returning maybe to, biblical glory of Israel. Hopefully you're right, and hopefully that's the case. Okay, so Shlomo had 3,300 project managers who supervised the people who were doing the work. There were 150,000 workers involved in this project of delivering the wood beams to the Beis HaMikdash. There were 80,000 workers involved in hewing the stone from the mountains, and there were 30,000 in a rotation that were going to the Lebanon to be trained in the skills of woodworking and artistry, fashioning beautiful wood surfaces, etc. Vayitzav HaMelech, and the king commanded, Vayusiu Avonim Gedolos. These workers who were hewing stone from the mountains, they brought big, great stones. Avonim Yikaros, precious stones. Now the question is, what is this Avonim Yikaros, this precious stones that Solomon or the Navi here is referring to? What precious stones were brought to build the Beis Hamikdash? Really none. There were no rubies and diamonds and whatever other precious stones there are. They didn't bring those kind of precious stones to the construction of the temple. Avonim Yikaros means, says the Mefarshim, huge stones, great slabs of stone. And of course, all of us know, all of us who have, Metzudas Siyan, for instance, says Yikaros, which translates literally into precious stones. He says, no, Kevedos u'makishos, they were strong, big, heavy, strong boulders, you might say, or slabs of stone. And anybody who has been to the underground tunnels by the Beis Hamikdash comes across that one slab they say weighs 40,000 tons. And they marvel at how it got there. Some say it was hewn right from the bedrock on the spot. Some say it was transported through a method of those big wooden wheels that they had. Anyway, there were apparently methods of delivering these huge stones that the Egyptians demonstrated with the building of the pyramids. The ancients knew how to transport these heavy slabs. And some say, no, this 40,000 ton stone is just so massive and heavy that it had to have been hewn from the bedrock on the spot. I don't want to get into that because I'm no expert, but that's
the Jews had the experience when they built the temple. And they,
from Egypt?
From Egypt to build the pyramids.
That was like 500 years ago, earlier, but okay. As we will see from the next pasuk. Oh, well, no, the second to the... Okay, so we're on pasuk Lamed Beis. Avonim Yikaros, we just finished in pasuk Lamed Aleph. Precious stones doesn't mean precious in the terms of being precious stones. It means precious in the terms of their weight, their heaviness and strength. The Yased Habayis, to the foundation of the house of the temple. Avnei Gosis, hewn stone, cut out of the mountainside. Vayivsulu bonei Shlomo bonei Hiram v'hagivlim. And the builders, Solomon's builders, the ones that he was having trained, Ubonei Hiram, and the builders from Hiram, from Tzor, the Sidonese, v'hagivlim, this was another nation that had expertise in stonework. Vayachinu ha'etzim v'havonim lebenos habayis, and they prepared the wood, the beams, and the stones, the massive stones, in order to construct the temple. And that is the end of Parikh. Now we will start Parikh Vav, Pasuk Aleph, chapter 6, verse 1.
Hello. I'm on your line to say I'm an electrician, so I don't know so much about stones, but this huge stone, they say, it comes from the extension from the temple. It's not from Shalom, but it was Hiram, what's that?
No, Hordus.
Hordus. Heros, yeah, Heros. And I also struggle with that point, because the text says it's huge stones. Who had the wisdom to move that stone? Because even the Romans had problems to move heavy, big stones. What we see in other places. So I see the text makes an indication it's Shlomo built these foundations. And then maybe Hordus will be built.
Hordus extended the Beis Hamikdash.
Yeah, you know that. Yeah.
But there was a building already there, but that was not Solomon's building. But the history of the world is that whenever something is torn down and destroyed, there's always scattered stone left in place, and that was used in the next project that came along. So some of those stones could only be back from the temple of Shlomo, and some of them could only be from the temple of that Zerubbabel and Ezra built, and some of them could be all the way back to the temple that Herod built. It's an amalgamation of building materials that were found on the site, plus new materials that were imported to the site. But it's a good point.
They have a cave of Zedekiah in East Jerusalem.
Excuse me?
There's a cave of Zedekiah in
Yes.
East Jerusalem.
Right.
Where they came, they quarried stone
That's right.
for Moses' temple.
Good. And probably for Solomon's too, at some point. Vayhi b'shmonim shana v'arba miyot shana l'tzeis b'nei Yisrael mi'eretz Yisrael. And it was in the 480th year, after the children of Israel emerged from Egypt, Bashana Haravias, in the 4th year of the reign of Shlomo HaMelech, the Chodesh Ziv, in the month of Ziv, Hu HaChodesh HaSheni, that is the 2nd month, which is Iyar. Says Rashi says, why was Iyar? Well, Iyar is a Babylonian name to the month. The Ispe Ziva Li'ilona, because that's when the trees began to, have greenery. Spring is in Nisan, and you have little buds maybe emerging in the spring. But by Iyar, there's leaves on the trees, and it turns the trees green. So that's why it's called Chodesh Ziv, the month of shining. The trees begin to shine. Hu HaChodesh HaSheni is the 2nd month, Iyar. L'mloch Shlomo al Yisrael, of the reign of Solomon over Israel, Vayivyon Habayis Hashem, and he commences construction of the base Hashem, the house of God. Now there's a big thing that is over there. I don't want to say this, but I'll say it anyway. There are people who think that until the Babylonian exile, the Jewish people refer to the months by Chodesh, Rishon, Sheni, Shlishi. If you notice in the Torah, for instance, it'll tell you when is Yom Kippur. Esor LaChodesh HaShvi'i, on the 10th day of the 7th month. It doesn't say Tishrei, doesn't say any name. It calls it by its number. Why do we use numbers? Same thing with the days of the week. Yom Rishon, Yom Sheni, Yom Shlishi, Yom Revi, Yom Chamishi, Yom HaShishi, except when you get to Shabbos, we say Yom HaShabbat, the Shabbos. Because we want to, every day of the year, we want to remember that the 7th day is different than all the other days of the week. The 7th day is Shabbos Lashem, a day of rest to God. Same thing with the months. Remember what we said, the first mitzvah given to the children of Israel is a Chodesh Hazeh Lochem. This month, which is Nisan, is a Chodesh Harishon. It is the first month to you, the Chodshei Hashanah, to the months of the year. And every month we remember by calling it by a number that Nisan is the Chodesh Harishon, the first month. The first mitzvah that was given to the children of Israel was sanctification of the month. Sanctify the month. Chodesh Nisan is the first month that was sanctified, and therefore we call it Chodesh HaRishon. Even though the world was created in Tishrei, Tishrei is called Chodesh HaShvi'i because it's the 7th month in the order if you begin to count with Nisan being the first.